In a small town in Michigan called Midland, an enterprising chemist named Herbert Henry Dow established in 1897 what would become one of the largest and most controversial chemical empires in the world. Dow Chemical Company was born out of Dow's brilliant invention to extract bromine from underground brines, a chemical previously imported. But what began as a modest bromine and bleach operation soon turned into an unstoppable machine driven by corporate greed and a lack of scruples. This is the toxic story of Dow Chemical Company. Dow was founded in 1897 by chemist Herbert Henry Dow. Tired of importing most of their raw materials from Europe, Herbert Henry Dow spotted an untapped opportunity in the underground brines flowing beneath his feet. After years of relentless experimentation, Dow finally nailed a revolutionary method to extract bromine, a crucial chemical in products like pesticides, straight from these salty waters. It was a groundbreaking discovery that shook up the norms. In 1897, Dow set up a small company in the town of Midland to cash in on his innovation. Their start was modest. Dow Chemical Company began by selling just bleach and potassium bromide to early customers. But Dow had big dreams. By 1902, his plant was churning out 72 tons of bleach every day. However, the major British chemical corporations weren't ready to let this upstart entrepreneur take over. They tried to crush Dow with a brutal price war in the bleach market. But the young businessman stood his ground, matching his rivals' price cuts even when it meant losing over $90,000 in revenue. This determination marked the start of a lasting tradition at Dow, the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive and thrive. Instead of giving in to their adversaries, Dow switched gears and rapidly expanded their product range in new directions. Just a few miles across the Atlantic, German bromide producers recognized the threat posed by this new American company to their own businesses. In 1905, they flooded the U.S. market with cheap bromide in a desperate attempt to prevent Dow from expanding its own sales in Europe. But Dow had already shown a knack for bold and unexpected moves. Instead of directly competing with the Germans, they simply bought up their surplus of cheap bromide and then shipped it back to Europe, selling it there at higher prices. This bold counterattack completely undermined their competitors and ensured Dow's survival. With their initial rivals defeated, Dow hurried to further diversify their portfolio at lightning speed. In just 2 decades since its founding, the company became a major producer of agricultural chemicals, elemental chlorine, phenol, dyes, and metallic magnesium. And as the First World War erupted in 1914, Dow Chemical Company's newly honed capabilities quickly became a crucial asset for the wartime efforts of the United States. Dow's production lines churned out essential war materials: magnesium for incendiary flares that illuminated the nighttime battlefields, monochlorobenzene and phenol for explosive charges that blasted through enemy trenches, and bromine for tear gases that incapacitated rival troops. By 1918, at the height of the global conflict, an astonishing 90% of all Dow's output was dedicated to the Allied war effort. The fortunes of the company and the nation had become tightly intertwined with the momentum of the global military machinery. It was also during these harsh years that Dow adopted the enduring red diamond logo that remains its corporate emblem today. While its exact origins remain unclear, the symbol seemed to emerge from the war's ashes as a foreshadowing of the explosive growth and aggressive expansion that would define the decades to come for Dow Chemical. It had found a profitable niche in the business of death. During World War II, Dow reached new levels of notoriety. They had expanded to the shores of North Carolina, and there, this plant played a crucial role in the American war effort. Dow had partnered with Ethel Corporation to extract bromine from seawater. And why was this so important? Well, because bromine was a key component in producing aviation fuel. In fact, that plant was one of only 2 in the entire country capable of manufacturing this precious compound for military aircraft. With such strategic importance, it's no wonder it became a very desirable target for the Germans. Additionally, Wilmington, the nearby city where it was located, was a significant military enclave with several relevant installations. The Nazi submarines knew it well. Disabling that plant would be a severe blow to the Allied Air Force. And so they did. A German submarine attacked the plant while it was producing bromine at full throttle in 1942. Years later, as the nuclear era dawned, a new dark chapter unfolded for Dow Chemical Company. Far from the shiny corporate offices and well-oiled assembly lines, the company had struck a deal with the atomic devil. From 1951 to 1975, Dow took charge of operations at the Rocky Flats plant, a bleak complex outside Denver that would become a focal point for one of the nation's worst environmental disasters. Rocky Flats was a nuclear weapons production facility that manufactured the volatile plutonium triggers for the feared hydrogen bombs of the Cold War era. Under Dow's management, a toxic and unseen cloud hung over the facilities. Fires burning plutonium dust released deadly radioactive particles into the air. Spills of nuclear waste contaminated the land. In 1957, the worst fears came true when a fire swept through a key building, spreading lethal radioactive rain over the surrounding area. As the underground radioactive contamination grew, corporate executives turned a blind eye. For nearly 25 years under Dow's control, the Rocky Flats plant became a toxic sacrifice zone in pursuit of U.S. nuclear supremacy. Finally, in 1975, even the government's Department of Energy had seen enough corporate incompetence. The management of the facilities was then transferred to Rockwell International. But the damage was already done. In 1990, nearby residents filed a class action lawsuit against Dow and Rockwell for environmental contamination in the area. The case was settled in 2017 for $375 million. Instead of seeking redemption, Dow chose to plunge itself further into corporate darkness. As the flames of war consumed Vietnam, Dow Chemical Company once again found itself in the service of U.S. military efforts. In 1965, at the government's request, the company began producing napalm, a chemical incendiary weapon as brutal as it was deadly. Napalm was essentially gelatinized gasoline, designed to burn at extreme temperatures and adhere to the skin of its victims. A single napalm bomb could create a raging inferno that consumed everything in its path: vegetation, buildings, vehicles, and even human flesh. Despite knowing the horrors of napalm, Dow eagerly accepted the lucrative government contract to produce the deadly compound. When other suppliers later backed out due to public pressure, Dow refused to budge, cynically stating that its first obligation was to the government. Student protests against Dow and its napalm production erupted on college campuses nationwide. Pacifist groups organized boycotts against the company's consumer products. Corporate recruiters were harassed and driven off campus. But Dow never gave in. Instead, it continued to explore other avenues of pollution. During those same turbulent years of the 1960s, Dow also became a major supplier of a highly toxic chemical defoliant known as Agent Orange. Manufactured in plants in New Zealand, Michigan, and elsewhere, Agent Orange was extensively sprayed over the jungles of Vietnam by U.S. and British forces. The aim was sinister: to clear foliage and deprive Vietnamese rebels of cover and food. But Agent Orange contained an extremely toxic and cancer-causing dioxin called TCDD that lingered in the environment for decades. As U.S. war veterans and Vietnamese civilians began suffering unusually high rates of birth defects, disabilities, and various cancers years later, researchers traced the cause of these mysterious illnesses to widespread dioxin contamination. Dow had been well aware of the deadly dangers of dioxin since the mid-1960s. In fact, during a closed-door meeting with other chemical companies in 1965, Dow scientists voiced concerns about the possibility of a new wave of government regulations if their findings on health impacts were made public. In the years that followed, Dow conspired to cover up the truth about its responsibility for dioxin contamination. Even during Ronald Reagan's presidency in the 1980s, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency suppressed crucial data and removed key references to Dow from a major dioxin report, all to appease Dow. This cover-up by the EPA shows just how powerful this corporation was. It wasn't until November 2006 that the appalling environmental impacts of Dow at its Midland, Michigan headquarters finally came to light. It was discovered that sediments in the WWII and Saginaw Rivers and Saginaw Bay contained extremely high levels of cancer-causing dioxins, directly linked to Dow's plant discharges. While local residents weren't directly exposed, those consuming fish from the contaminated rivers showed elevated levels of dioxin in their blood. In 2008, under mounting pressure, Dow finally agreed to establish a fund for dioxin cleanup, decades after the toxic contamination began. But that wasn't the end of it all. Over the decades, Dow's scandals have only multiplied. EPA cover-ups, poisoning of agricultural workers with the pesticide DBCP, massive tax fraud through illegal tax shelters. The list goes on and on. To this day, Dow remains an environmental outcast, tangled in endless legal battles over cleaning up the dioxin contamination it left in rivers and bays. Despite its attempts to greenwash itself, activists keep a close watch on this corporation that has been harming the earth for over 125 years. In 2003, Dow Chemical Company was involved in another pesticide scandal in New York, adding to its troubling history of questionable environmental practices and corporate negligence. That year, a Dow subsidiary called Dow AgroSciences was fined $2 million by the New York Attorney General's office for making misleading claims about the safety of its pesticides like Dursban and other products. Unfortunately, this case is just one more example of the harmful environmental impact associated with Dow Chemical. The company has been responsible for numerous pollutant spills, including those in the WWII River in Michigan, its hometown, and the discharge of 17 billion liters of wastewater daily into the Brazos River in Texas and the Gulf of Mexico in the early 1970s. The situation at Dow's secretive Rocky Flats site in Colorado was equally serious, described as an environmental nightmare for the Denver area. In Canada, Dow released significant amounts of mercury into the environment through air emissions, water discharges, and residual sludge from its chlorine production. Yet, in 2015, the company announced its boldest and most predatory move yet, a merger with its historic rival DuPont in a stock deal valued at $130 billion. For both companies, the merger represented an opportunity to create a true industrial giant, a player so large and powerful that it could distort markets, crush smaller competitors, pressure governments to bend to its demands, and maximize profits without restraint. But this would only be a temporary union. 2 years after the merger, Dow-DuPont would split into independent entities focusing on agriculture, chemical materials, and specialty products. But the split wasn't just a coincidence. It was completed on April 1, 2019, when Dow Inc. became a standalone publicly traded company and the direct parent of the Dow Chemical Company. Dow no longer needed another company to bolster its power. However, not everything went smoothly. In 2022, disappointing financial results led Dow to announce the layoffs of 2,000 employees as it explored other ways to cut costs. For over more than a century, Dow Chemical has shown time and again that there's no line it won't cross and no heinous act it won't commit if there's money to be made. From chemical weapons to corporate ecocide, Dow's list of offenses against humanity and the planet is truly alarming. This is the most toxic story you've ever heard, a tale of unchecked greed and ruthless destruction in the relentless pursuit of profit. If you found this story captivating, check out the next video on your screen about Wells Fargo, the company that scammed its customers not once, but twice. We'll see you there.